Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with how to build a really basic classical music collection, focusing on a handful of really essential works that should help get you started in the world of classical music generally, and that everybody ought to own and get to know. And the idea behind this series is for you to really take your time and get to learn each piece of music individually, and then turn yourself loose. Go crazy. Do whatever you want. And today we're talking about Rimsky-Korsakov's Sheherazade. Now, Sheherazade is an iconic piece of music for a lot of reasons, and it raises issues which are going to sort of come up over and over again as you start to listen to classical music and hear music from various places and countries and composers. Rimsky-Korsakov was Russian. He lived from, I can give you the actual dates here, 1844 to 1908. And he was mostly an opera composer, but that's not how he's best known to most of us, because his operas were written in Russian, and there was, until rather recently, a somewhat limited market in the West for opera in Russian. And so he's known for a small handful, of orchestral pieces: Sheherazade, the Capriccio Espagnole, the Russian Easter Overture, his orchestration of Mussorgsky's Night on Bald Mountain, and Mussorgsky's, opera, Boris Godunov. But Rimsky-Korsakov is also known for being one of the great orchestrators of the 19th century, a virtuoso in his handling of instrumental color. And Sheherazade is absolutely a clinic on instrumental color and orchestral timbres. And oh my gosh, it's amazing. It's in 4 movements. The work has 4 movements, and it's based on Tales of the Arabian Nights. You know the story, right? Sheherazade keeps her hubby awake night after night telling him stories, because he had decreed that all women are unfaithful, and so he was going to have his way with them and then put them to death after their first night. And in order to forestall this eventuality, she keeps him occupied with 1,001 tales until he finally forgets all about his desire to kill all his wives, and they all live happily ever after. That's the basic story. And of course, 1,001 Nights contains Sheherazade's stories. And some of the most famous stories in all of civilization come from 1,001 Nights. Aladdin and his lamp and all that stuff comes from 1,001 Nights. It's an amazing collection. So, Rimsky-Korsakov chose 4 stories, kind of loosely chose 4 stories because some of them aren't specific, but they inspired by the Tales of 1,001 Nights. He was a fabulous storyteller in music because he wrote all these operas, which of course tell stories. And the interesting thing about Sheherazade is that it's called a symphonic suite. It is not called a symphony, even though it has the same 4 sections as a symphony. And had Rimsky-Korsakov written more works like this, he might well have invented an entirely different musical form that we would be talking about by itself. But unfortunately, there's just this. And of course, other people wrote some similar things. But basically, this is the one. So why is it a suite and not a symphony, even though it has 4 movements? It has very characteristic, gorgeous, voluptuous themes. There is the music of the Sultan, which is the very opening. Da, 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 ba, da, da. He's very stern and pompous. Then there's Sheherazade on the violin and harp, a very sexy, slinky opportunity for the concertmaster, the first violin player in the orchestra, to really shine. And then there are the stories themselves, each of which has their own tunes and which also shares tunes. Sheherazade appears in every movement. She's there spinning her tales, and keeping the guy going. So she's in there all the time. And so is the Sultan in various guises, but also the themes for the various movements. So they all get mixed up in the finale. So let me just tell you what they are. And then we're going to listen to a little bit after we talk about Scheherazade's place in the universe of music. The first movement is called The Sea and Sinbad's Ship. It's a wonderful, wonderful evocation of the rocking ocean and the strings. And the melody is the melody of the Sultan himself. Da, 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 da. That becomes the Sinbad theme. Then we've got The Calendar Prince, the story of the Calendar Prince. There's no way of knowing exactly what happens in this particular one. It's a fairy tale, and lots of things happen. There's some battle music, and there's supposedly a flight on a rock. You know the rock? The giant bird. R-O-C, not rock as in boulder. I mean rock. And it's got some beautiful woodwind writing. And then we have The Young Prince and the Young Princess. It's a love story with some absolutely gorgeous tunes, and Scheherazade appears in the middle as a central episode in this particular movement. It's the slow movement. If this had been a symphony, it would be a slow movement. And then the finale is the Festival at Baghdad. And during the Festival at Baghdad, everybody shows up from all of the previous movements until at the climax of the festival, the music cuts cinematically to a scene with a storm-tossed sea and Sinbad's ship being destroyed by going to pieces on a rock surmounted by a bronze warrior, which magnetically draws the ship in to its final destruction, which occurs at the stroke of a tam-tam or gong, which ordinarily you never hear in most performances. You do in this one, thank goodness. It's one of the most thrilling portraits of the fury of the sea during a storm. And it's marvelous. And then the ending, of course, returns to Scheherazade telling her story and lulling the Sultan to sleep, knowing that she's been successful in her efforts to prevent his horrible, awful, terrible decree from being called out. So that's the story. Why is this not a symphony? It's not a symphony for very formal reasons, because it doesn't have a movement in symphonic sonata form. And usually if you're going to have a symphony arose out of the instrumental sonata and sonata form, which is a specific way of writing music. And Rimsky-Korsakov was very conscious of this because he was very tradition-minded. So he basically says straight out that rather than indulging in development, as would happen in a movement in sonata form, where you have a couple themes and then they get all developed and toyed with, and then they come back, in the home key at the very end, that's what sonata form is basically. He said he rather wanted to try and create a large work that lived on the interrelationship between all the themes as they appear in the various movements to unify the piece, and instrumental color, on the use of instruments themselves, the color of the instruments, to create a unified atmosphere. And he succeeded magnificently in doing this. He really did. But the difference between this and a symphony in four movements is really pretty technical, and not something you need to bother yourself with in a neurotic way, but it's going to come up. People will mention things. What makes a symphony as opposed to a something else. The other thing about Scheherazade that makes it such an iconic work is it is a classic example of Orientalism in music, exoticism, the influence of the Far East as seen by the imperialist West. I mean, if you want to call it imperialist, I don't. Today, where everything is supposed to be woke and politically correct, you might say that it's cultural appropriation to take ideas or scales or musical materials or ideas or inspiration from non-Western cultures and cloak them in Western garb. But I think that's an absolutely fabulous thing to do. They should do it as often as possible. And whether you like it or not, or have, philosophical issues with it, the fact is that some of the greatest masterpieces of Western music were written in this idiom, all the way going back to, Mozart's abduction from the Seraglio opera, it happens in Turkey, and, all of these ways of seeking inspiration in exotic cultures and exotic musical modes. And Rimsky-Korsakov evokes that with unfailing mastery and point. And as an example of that, I'm going to play you the big climax in the festival in Baghdad. The festival's hopping along full swing, and then all of a sudden we're transported to the ocean with Sinbad's ship adrift on the waves, being inexorably drawn toward the rock surmounted by the bronze warrior, magnetically bringing doom and destruction. We have the Seattle Symphony under Gerard Schwartz on Naxos in this really very good performance. And here they go. Now, if you've heard that before, yes, you may say, okay, that's nothing new. If you're new to classical music, then you're in for an amazing, amazing treat. And I really think that even those who are very familiar with this piece should give it some respect and love, because this is one of those pieces that was so frequently played, almost overplayed, in the beginning decades of the 20th century, that people started to get, I think, a little tired of it, which I think is a terrible, terrible thing. If you're tired of something, stop listening to it for a while, then go back and listen to it with fresh ears, because you'll be amazed at how wonderful some of these things are. Really wonderful. And Sheherazade is definitely in the wonderful category. So I hope that this will encourage you to explore Sheherazade and the other works of Rimsky-Korsakov, because he wrote tons of fabulously colorful orchestral music, a lot of suites from his operas, drawn from his operas, and maybe even some of the operas themselves if you feel up to it. But this is an amazing piece of music that is essential, not just for a basic classical music collection, but in the history of Western music more generally, for what it does and how it does it. Keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.